Hi, thank you so much for having us at this incredible conference. My name is Danny Pinter. I'm Senior Legal Counsel with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation Law Center. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Powell. I will let her introduce herself. Stephanie?
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephanie Powell, and I am a former Executive Director of Journey Out, which is a service provider in which we assisted adult victims of human trafficking in the Los Angeles area. I am now with the National Center of Sexual Exploitation, in which I am the Director of Law Enforcement Training and Survivor Services. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you so much, Dr. Powell. So what I want to talk to you about today is our vision for litigation as activism. We believe that the sex trade can be brought down and that fundamentally society can be changed in how we address human by massive civil litigation. And so I want to discuss a little bit about what that is, what it looks like, and what it would mean for survivors if they want to participate in litigation like that. So the problem, which I know that all of you are intimately aware, is that women and children are being sexually trafficked and exploited, not only, on the streets and in hotels, but also on the internet. We at Nicosia Law Center are wanting to focus in on this internet space where women and children are trafficked. We believe it's really propping up the industry, and they've been given a free pass for too long. So that is kind of what we're focusing on with our litigation. One of the areas of that we see a major bad actor, and often an overlooked bad actor, is mainstream pornography, such as Pornhub. For example, we know that many trafficking victims are trafficked into the pornography industry, or their abuse is recorded and then uploaded onto these pornography websites, which essentially knowingly profit off of this material. They do nothing to verify age or consent, and they know that many of the women and children depicted in the videos that they profit from are not there willingly or are children. So we want to hold them accountable, and we want to stop this practice, because not only is it a horrible form of exploitation, but it also keeps that trauma, keeps that exploitation alive for even longer than the survivor's trafficking experience. It lives on much longer than the internet. So that's where we're focusing our attention. And here's 5 ways, just to give you a brief overview of where we see the problems. So 5 ways that mainstream pornography profits from sexual exploitation. We know that trafficking victims are trafficked into the pornography industry specifically. An example of that would be the Girls Do Porn lawsuit that wrapped up last year. You may have followed it, but if not, in some, that was a case where 22 women brought a civil suit against a pornography production studio because they were lied to, drugged, coerced, tricked. Many times there was an elaborate fraudulent scheme where they lured these women on the premise of modeling gigs and acting gigs, only to bring them to this new state where they are all alone, don't know anyone, and then tell them, oh, actually, you're going to have to do these pornography suits. And then they threatened them and also lied about the distribution. They told every one of these women that these videos would not be put online, when they always intended to do that and did end up doing that. So those women actually won a multi-million-dollar verdict against that pornography production studio. And this also forced the hand of law enforcement to crack down on them as well. And they've been indicted for sex trafficking charges as well. And one of them is actually on the run. So that is an incredible outcome. And those women who are irreparably harmed, although there's nothing that can make up for what happened to them, some measure of justice was there. Their voices were heard. They were validated, and hopefully, ultimately, they will get some damages that can ease some of that pain and address some of the lifelong trauma issues that they have and will have. Another really disturbing instance that is coming up more and more is the reality that there is a lot of child sexual abuse material, even on mainstream pornography sites. Furthermore, victims like Rose Kalimba, who has spoken out in the news recently as part of the Traffic Hub campaign is an example of not only was she a child victim, but she was a sexual assault victim. And that sexual assault was recorded and put on Pornhub, one of the largest internet pornography websites and most well known. And so we know that there's many other victims out there. Further, there's image-based sexual abuse, also known as revenge porn, which is any type of non-consensually recorded or non-consensually shared pornography video. And also this really disturbing trend of voyeur pornography, where secret recordings, either secret cameras or drone cameras, men are recording women in sexually intimate settings and uploading it onto porn sites. There's actually a new case in South Carolina where some women were secretly filmed in a locker room changing, and those videos were put on a mainstream porn site. And so they are suing for that. And, that's what we want to see. We want to see that these women are able to stand up, have their voices heard, have this behavior condemned, and hopefully have them held accountable. So our strategy is to represent survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse who have further been exploited, not just on pornography websites, but other internet platforms, but to see that they get monetary damages, which means you're suing for money. And part of this is because that civil litigation is not criminal law. So the ultimate goal of this type of litigation is not to put someone in jail, although many times this calls a lot of attention and evidence to law enforcement that ends up leading to an investigation. But the goal of a civil litigation is to hit that corporation where it hurts, to force them to pay money to compensate for the harm that they've caused, and even punitive damages, which is a term for basically punishing them for what they've done. Further, we'd like to ask for injunctive relief, which means that we call for changes. We ask them to prevent this behavior from ever happening again. We ask them to fix their policies. So you can see the massive impact on an industry, on mainstream corporations this would have for a survivor to be victorious against them. We think it would completely change, the scope of our society in this conversation. So there's many different claims that a survivor may have. I think what's most relevant here is the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, offers a civil remedy for those who've been trafficked against those who have financially benefited. So not only can a survivor sue their trafficker, but they can sue anyone that knowingly financially benefited or should have known that they were financially benefiting. So in these instances of examples I gave for the porn industry, because the porn industry does not, for example, a big mainstream platform does not verify consent or age, even though there's been numerous instances in the news, numerous outreach, numerous public awareness campaigns letting them know that this exploitation is going on, that there's non-consensual and trafficking victims on their site. So at this point they should know, or even sometimes trafficking victims and minors will reach out to the platform and say, hey, like this video is me, I was a minor, or this is sexual assault, or I'm a trafficking victim. And in many cases, that pornography website will still leave it up. Well, in that instance, they know now that this is abuse that's on their site, and they know that they're profiting from it. So when they leave that video up, they are now in violation of TVPA, and the TVPA gives survivors this option to now sue for damages and for recovery. So that's where we're really wanting to target and really use that law to the benefit of survivors. It also is what helps us get around CDA 230 immunity, which is why the internet actors have been able to get away with so much for so long, because there's been this broad immunity applied to the internet. Essentially, courts have said, okay, if you host a big site and other people post on your site, you can't be responsible for that. But the fallout was instances like Backpage and all these things we've been talking about today, where these big internet companies really profit and facilitate from crime that's happening on their site because they're banking on that immunity. Well, after the Backpage takedown, there was an amendment called Fosta Sesta, which now allows these TVPA claims, now allows trafficking survivors to bring claims against internet companies that have benefited from their abuse. So we really want to use that law, and we want to use it to change society and to bring a measure of justice to victims if possible. So, these cases I think are extremely beneficial, and I think that they're much better for survivors in a lot of ways than the criminal justice system, but it's still not easy. So I just want to make sure that you have all the information, and I'll just quickly go over a few of the things that are difficult about this. And I know that Dr. Powell will expand on what a survivor can expect from this type of litigation, or what might be her hesitation. But there are evidentiary issues. So we're going to have to, for example, if this is a case of a video that's ended up online, we're going to have to find those videos or some evidence of those videos, which can be difficult and also just traumatizing to go back and find these things. We have to overcome that CDA 230 immunity, which I sort of explained how I think we can using the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, but it's still a hurdle. Sometimes if too much time has gone by, we'll run up against what's called the statute of limitations. So for trafficking, the statute of limitations is 10 years after, if there was an adult, it's 10 years after they turned 18, or if they were an adult trafficking victim, it's 10 years after the abuse stopped. So sometimes, as we all know, it can take a really long time for a survivor to feel comfortable coming forward or to engage in litigation like this. So it could be outside that 10 years, which we still think, a lot of times there's still other options. We can allege and ask the court to toll or extend that statute of limitations if there's good reasons for that, but it is a big hurdle if we're outside that 10-year window. So it's just something to keep in mind. Further, and I think Stephanie will talk about this, it is an emotional toll for sure. I'm going to go into why I think civil litigation is a great option for survivors and why I think that emotional toll is mitigated. But it's still litigation. You're still going to face defendants, although it's more of an impersonal defendant, like a corporation, and not a trafficker, which is helpful. But they're still going to have some nasty lawyers that are going to put pressure on the victim. Could be very difficult. It's also a very time-consuming process. So when you start this litigation, I can't give, okay, by a month or 2 months or 3 months, it'll all be wrapped up, we'll have a resolution. These things can take a very long time, sometimes even years, which, can be frustrating, and it's just a long-term commitment. Although luckily, most of the work is all done by the lawyers, and there's not so much in court time for the survivor, although ultimately there may be. And then financial. These cases cost money. The good thing is Nkosi and any of the attorneys that we work with would not charge the survivor a dime. This would be free for any survivor who wants to proceed on this type of case. Nkosi would be doing this pro bono, or sometimes there's contingency fees, which means that it means that we only get paid if you win. So if you win, there would be like a percentage that would go to the lawyers. Or what's nice about the Trafficking Victims Protection Act is it actually provides for attorneys' fees. So not only can you get financial recovery, but then separately, that defendant, if they lose, they have to pay the attorney's bills. So again, that's not coming from the survivor. So that is a good thing. And so now I just want to briefly go over what civil litigation looks like as opposed to what many survivors are familiar with, which would be like the criminal justice system and the criminal court system. So civil litigation is not criminal court. It is a separate court where if something happens to you, someone does something wrong, you can sue them for money. And so the goal of that litigation is not to send someone to jail, but to get compensation for your injury. And so that's the focus of those types of lawsuits. And the good thing about that is, one, there is a lower burden of evidence. So the evidentiary standard is lower. In criminal court, it's beyond reasonable doubt because someone's potentially going to jail. But here, since the worst thing that can happen is they change their behavior, which is that injunctive relief I talked about, or they have to pay some money. So you don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a little bit lower of an evidentiary burden, which is really helpful to us, and you have a greater likelihood of winning your case. Further, survivors can proceed anonymously. And I know this is a huge relief to many survivors because many of them still living in fear of their traffickers, or they've moved on with their lives and they really don't want this out in the public. And so we can file either under a Jane Doe or initials and really protect that survivor's identity. Also, the types of cases that at least NCOSE is wanting to bring are against big corporate actors. We want to see change from the top down. So that means we're going after, more mainstream corporate facilitators and not those individual perpetrators, not the traffickers. It would prevent the survivor from having to face those individuals again. Further, this is the survivor's case. So in criminal court, the prosecutor is working for the state. The prosecutor is representing the government. And although they're compelled to, and many times, take into account what the victim needs and what the victim wants, and hopefully they just are doing that because it's the right thing to do, they are not beholden to the victim. The victim is not their client. And what I know can be very traumatizing for survivors is they don't have any control over that process. But here in civil litigation, the survivor is the client. So the attorney is working for the survivor. They're working for you. They're not working for anyone else. And so even though, the attorney will have their advice and their legal advice about, what's the best avenue to take, at the end of the day, it's the survivor who calls the shots. If the survivor says, I don't want to do this anymore, then that's it. It's over. If the survivor says, this is the outcome I want. I want to settle. Or if they say, I don't want to settle and I want to go to trial, those two things, that's up to the survivor, and they can tell their attorney that. And I just want to reassure you that NCOSE is completely wanting this to serve survivors. That's its ultimate goal. So this is going to be a survivor-led process. And any attorneys that we partner with will have that same mindset. So it will definitely be the survivor who is calling the ultimate shots when it comes to the big outcomes of the case and what they're willing to do. Another advantage is that monetary damages, which, there's no guarantee that we'll win any particular case. And in like the case of Backpage, they're just criminals. Like they filed bankruptcy and they did all kinds of shady stuff. So a lot of the money kind of disappeared or went on hold. So the victims haven't received compensation yet. There's always a chance that that can happen. But at the same time, what we're hoping to get, and what does happen a lot of times, is significant monetary compensation, which survivors need. And we know that. We know they need that. We know their families need that. So that can be a huge relief and an assistance. They've been irreparably harmed, and we want the bad guys to pay for that, right? So that's a good advantage of civil litigation. And lastly, there's societal change. Like we said, we want change from the top down. We want those big actors who are actually making the big money from all of these traffickers to go down. And that's what we think is going to have the most lasting effect. And also it's such an opportunity to change society and to educate the public. So that's what we're hoping to do, is launch a movement. In that vein, we really want to encourage survivors who are interested and willing to come forward to join litigation like this. We think that it can be a really exciting opportunity for them to take some control over their situation, to earn a degree of justice, maybe some monetary compensation, and to ultimately change the world. So I hope that you can consider working with us in this great cause and in this movement. We're very excited to work with you, and I'll turn it over with Dr. Stephanie Powell and let her talk a little bit about this from a direct service provider's perspective.
Thank you so much, Danny. Great presentation. And, as I was listening, I was thinking about, wow, this is such a great tool. As activists and advocates and service providers, this just gives us another tool in the toolbox, and it's much needed. And when you talk about compensation for damages, and for those that work hands-on with survivors, you see the end result of trauma. You see the end result of people that have been traumatized, and in some cases, all of their lives. And it makes it very hard when they try to recover and to move on with their lives. So the fact that there's that possibility in that toolbox that they could be compensated for the damages that have happened to them, I think that in and of itself is fabulous. Along with the opportunity to take down some of the big brands, it's going to make a huge difference. One of the things that I did before I was journey out is I was Los Angeles police officer for 30 years, and I worked the vice unit. And many times we would go into some of these hotels. Sometimes they would be big, sometimes they would be small, and we would do reverse things where we would go in and it would be very obvious why we were at that hotel, and we would try and rent that room for just an hour. Couldn't be more obvious than that. And for people to actually rent the room to us. And I was thinking, okay, so we give these guys a ticket, and then that's it, so what? But having the opportunity to take down an entire corporation and bringing to light exactly what it is that they're doing with their knowledge, I think is extremely huge. The other thing about this is that, again, not only does it change the industries, but also we have the ability to change legislative policies that address these issues. And that's huge. And it gives a survivor a platform where he or she is really actually being heard. And not just heard, but something's being done about it. So it's not only that we're hearing them, but we're giving them a voice, and we're doing something about it, and they have the ability to change legislation and to change policies of some of these big corporations. And I think that is huge for them. But having said that, there are some that may not be ready for what this is going to involve. Because depending on what the case is, regardless of whether it is a hotel brand or it is something like Pornhub or some of the other pornography services that are out there where they're uploading on the internet, it's going to draw attention. And there's going to be some that are not going to want that attention. And there are going to be some that are going to feel empowered by that because they have the ability to do something about it. But wherever they are, it could be triggering. And so that is where the service providers come in. You're going to have to walk the walk with them. You're going to have to walk this journey with them, not only during the case, but after this case is over. And like Danny said, these cases can take an awfully long time. And so as a result of that, they might become impatient, or they might want to give up because they might feel that they've been given promises that nobody is keeping. And those that work with survivors, you know, when that happens, you run the risk of them completely giving up on you. And so that's where the service provider comes in and has to walk hand in hand. You know, I have to really hand it to Nkosi, and that's really how I got here. It's because they really understood that they needed someone to be able to help the survivor, to come in and help as an advocate, to help with the services that are going to be needed. And so having said that, you guys that are already doing this job, you already know the importance and what it's going to take to keep her or him or her going. The public scrutiny, you know, as Danny was saying, these attorneys are going to be relentless because their client chooses to lose a lot, regardless of who that client might be. And so the public scrutiny could probably be horrific. I mean, I think about the Epstein case and what those survivors have had to go through, or the R. Kelly case and what those survivors have had to go through it. They've had to stay strong, but again, needing somebody to walk that walk with them. I was writing down, the other thing that becomes kind of an issue is if perhaps the person might be an adult now, but when these things happen to them, they were a minor. There is a strong need, and it's extremely important to figure out how to store the child porn aspect of it. But that's the thing that our law center and Danny is wonderful. Kristen is wonderful. Ben is wonderful. And so those are the things that we have to figure out. So I only bring this up because sometimes we will ask for things of the client, and then when we get it, we might go, uh-oh, and then we might have to go back to the client again and say, you know what, we need this extra. Again, that's where the service provider comes in to help keeping them going. Just letting them know, hey, this may take a long period of time. Things might not be perfect. We may ask for a couple of things that we didn't ask before, but just kind of hang in there with us. Also, for those of you that do refer clients to us, just know that you're not going to be the only one working with that client and trying to figure out how to keep him or her going. I also am going to be working alongside you and that client in order to make sure that they feel comfortable. And as I talk about them feeling comfortable, as we said, this is survivor-led. If you are very close with the person that you have recommended to us, you got to let them know, because I think it's extremely important that if they're feeling uncomfortable or if they make the decision that they don't want to go on with the lawsuit, that they're not letting you down. Because I think that's really important. Sometimes when we're working with survivors, they can get attached to us, and sometimes they will do things even if they don't want to do it. And that makes sense, right? Because that's kind of been the mode that they've been used to, especially if they've had a trafficker. So I think it's that we need to be extremely careful that if they're hesitant or they're not sure, that they need to feel comfortable and be in a safe place to be able to say, I don't know about this, and for us to be able to say, that's okay, this is truly survivor-led, this is truly about you, and if you're not comfortable, it's all right. Our relationship stays the same. And isn't that a part of what we're supposed to be doing when we talk about trauma-informed care? So with that, I really hope that this presentation gives you some ideas, puts another tool in the toolbox. You know, we need every tool we can get in order to fight human sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and the exploitation of those in pornography. And so, again, I am hoping that this tool in the toolbox will give you everything you need in order to help the clients that we serve, the people that we serve, become whole. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. And please feel free to reach out to us. Here's some of our contact information. I apologize, this is before Dr. Powell joined our team, so I don't have her featured on here, but she is a very important member of our Law Center team. But please reach out, and we hope to hear from you soon. And even if you have questions and want to learn more, we welcome those questions. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of this excellent conference, and thank you for having us.